Welcome to a new episode of Delphine Circle, where we uncover the mind, body, and spirit of success. Subscribe now for free to receive updates on the latest interviews. Then, sit back, relax, and tune in. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the Circle.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So happy to have you. For our audience, we have Steve Gumaer, founder, CEO of Novi, a nonprofit organization who is dedicated to providing support for children that are living in war-torn areas throughout the world. Steve, you and I met recently through our friend Lane Rankin, and I was so blown away when I got to hear about what you do. It's such a unique, incredible mission that you're on, and I've been calling you a hero ever since. So I'm honored to have you here. And for our audience, please help share a little bit about Novi and what exactly do you do?
It really could go back 30 years to when my wife and I hiked into a refugee camp on the Thai-Myanmar border. And we had made friends with a woman who had been a victim of that war, lost her husband and about 9 months of her life. And when we met her, there was a child sleeping on her bamboo floor. And this 4-year-old little girl was carried by pro-democracy soldiers from the village that she came from, where those same soldiers went to find out, document what happened, and find survivors. Myanmar Army was burning down villages systematically through the 90s and early 2000s. And so they brought this little girl across the country, across Karen State, across the Moy River, and into this refugee camp. And this woman, Rose, looked up at us and asked if we'd help set up some kind of safety net for children, orphans, and unaccompanied minors in the refugee camps. And we said yes. So Novi is a continuation of that. I mean, that was 1994. We've done a lot since then. But of all the things that we've done, helping children recover from the trauma of war is the most meaningful. And that's what Novi is all about.
I mean, when you even describe that to me, it's so hard for me to wrap my head around what that would even be like. But how does that work that you do compare to, let's say, the work of the Red Cross or other relief organizations that we're all familiar with?
Those large international agencies have an important place in the puzzle of care for migration, refugees, and state-level violence. Definitely have a place. The place that they generally don't occupy is where fighting is still ongoing, where there's still conflict, where there's liability to send people in to do any kind of programs. So generally, those organizations will help once those people are out of harm's way and into the safety of another country or across some threshold in the conflict. We generally go to where that conflict is and work to help those families find a safe place to stay, have shelter, and the basic provisions like food that they need to survive. Another thing, Delphine, is state level or international aid is foreign aid. You've heard that term on the TV and in the news. Foreign aid is before anything else, it's diplomatic. And when we've looked at getting state funding for some of the work we do, we've understood through the process that it wouldn't work for us because, for example, in Myanmar, if we were to help in the ethnic states in Myanmar, we would have to have an MOU with the regime, the very people doing the killing.
What is an MOU?
Memorandum of Understanding. So we would have to have an agreement with the government, the same government that's killing these ethnic minorities that we're out there to help. We would have to have a partnership with them. It simply wouldn't function. We wouldn't have access to the people who need our help. And so it's a more complex organization than that, but our unique place in the puzzle of refugees, migration, and armed conflict is to help closer to where these people are running from and help them in their crisis.
So you're actually going in the middle of the war-torn areas and working on the ground. how have you survived 28 years continually putting yourself in harm's way like that?
Well, when those of us who do that work do it, especially it's mostly local people who take the biggest risk. It's ethnic people from the ethnic states of Myanmar, or it's Ukrainians in the case of Ukraine. They're the heroes that take the risk to really get aid delivered to where the conflict is red hot. But when we have participated in that kind of aid for various reasons, we trust the local people and the local militias and the local sources of information to lead us and to get us in to do what we're there to do and then safely out.
So where does the funding come for this work that you do?
It's all private. I mentioned a little bit about the international NGO world, the foreign aid world, and why we don't apply for it anymore. We have applied for it, but we've stopped applying for foreign aid money from groups like USAID or the EU Forum or ECHO, because what comes along with it is all the diplomatic requirements that would mean there would be a limitation of who we could help and how we could help them. We would be prevented by, for example, armed conflict. We would be prevented from helping them. So all of our support is private. It comes from people like you who understand the work that we do and care so much that they send money.
People who are listening that obviously want to help now, you've been in Ukraine most recently. What is it what can they do to help? Where do they go to donate?
You know, I was on the border of Burma some years ago, and 3 villages were burned down on the other side of the river. There's a small river that divides Myanmar and Thailand. And while those villages were burning down and all of the civilians fled across the river, either swimming or in a small boat, we got a call that these people needed help. So I drove down to the border, and the first thing I met was a room full of officials who had gathered to talk about what had happened and how to help those people. And for me, it was the first time to really understand the incredible limitations of foreign aid and the hoops that are expected in order to get permission to help people who need help the most when they need it. And so I sat through this long assessment process with them. And then they finished and they were going to leave. They were going to drive back to the city 2 hours away. And I said, wait a minute, we need to help these people. There's 3,000 people gathered in this field with nothing but what they were able to swim with and their children. We've got to do something for them. And they said, no, we can't. We've just started an assessment. This takes time. We have to have these permissions in place before we can do it. And I said, no, give me your money right now. Just give me what money is in your pocket. This is what people were still using cash in Thailand. And so these INGO executives and assessment field officers gave me their money. And I was in my truck and I drove to the local wholesaler and bought food and blankets and supplies for those 3,000 people that day. So that story answers your question because our work is direct. It's direct to the people who need help the most. And the best way to give the support to help those people is through our website. That's novi.ngo.
It's so emotional to hear about what you're doing. And I think about, this is just one day for me. You know, this is one day of just me hearing the stories where this has been 28 years of your life. How have you learned to cope with the atrocities that you see and with the trauma that you are witnessing on a daily basis of these people?
Many times not well at all. I mean, some of the stories that come to mind right now, one little girl in Shan State who was brutally raped. She was 7 years old. And if I think of her face, it really still tears me up. And her story and just the horror of what she went through. Her parents were killed, and then this was done to her. And there were times when I didn't cope very well with it emotionally. And one time in particular when I completely broke down and needed help from a therapist, psychiatrist. But that was maybe 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Now, both my meditation and my spiritual practices, they're really an act of self-care, to get out beyond my ego and into this beautiful place that is peaceful is a daily reminder that there is peace in the world. And then the other discipline I do is to be encouraged by, there's all these millions of kids that we can't help, but there are these hundreds of thousands of children that we have helped. And for me, remembering that it has been the difference between life or death for many of those children, that really gives me strength to keep going in this work and even to hear the stories that I hear.
I read a blog post of yours recently. In fact, it was just 2 days ago while I was writing this, and it was so powerful, and it really summarized so clearly what's going on and the type of work that you guys are doing down there. Can I ask you to read that for me here?
Sure. I heard this just a few weeks ago in Lviv, in Ukraine. Ivan is from Irpin and is 12 years old. In the beginning of March, he watched as his father attempted to negotiate passage to safety with a Russian soldier. The soldier pulled his weapon and shot him multiple times, thinking he also hit Ivan. Ivan fell to the ground beside his dad and stayed still, his hoodie covering the sides of his face and head. The soldier stood above him and shot another round at his head, thinking it would finish the boy's life. Ivan stayed frozen. The bullet that made a hole in Ivan's hoodie hit the floor instead of his skull. When he felt sure the soldier had left, Ivan got up and walked away, leaving his father lying dead in a pool of blood. I heard this story yesterday from a Ukrainian medic who helped with evacuations from that city, Irpin.
I think it's hard we become desensitized, right? We listen to the news and we hear about what's going on in Ukraine and we hear about what's going on all over the world, and it really is almost just another headline when you live in a safe place and you're not really subjected to it. So, reading your post and watching and seeing what you guys are doing there has been super, super inspiring, but also it's been really, it's difficult. And when we hear that our government is sending aid, or when we hear that foreign governments are sending aid, is that anything that's coming to you guys? Is that something that is having an effect in a positive way that you see?
Some small amount of those billions of dollars will go to aid the families who have fled armed conflict. It'll go in the form of foreign aid, and it will be delivered eventually by local people if there's a high level of risk from warehouses from far back behind where that risk is. And it'll be managed by groups like the Red Cross or Save the Children or other large organizations, good organizations. The bulk of that money goes towards non-lethal aid for the armed forces, infrastructure reparations. For example, in Ukraine, 30 to 40% of their electricity power generation has been destroyed by Russian missiles now, or Russian attacks. And some of our aid will go to restore those power stations and substations so that people can get through the winter without freezing. So most of the aid goes towards infrastructure repairs or to non-lethal support for the resistance against the attacks.
So how do you choose? I mean, with so much going on, how do you choose what locations you go to, or even what countries you go to next?
We've always looked for the place where larger agencies won't go. And from the stories I told you, when those 3,000 people swam across the river from Burma into Thailand, and they needed food and shelter and blankets for their children. That was a crystallizing moment for me that helped me understand that what we're doing is special. Normally, aid will take about 6 weeks before it gets to a new place of conflict. It takes that long for government permissions and assessments and all of the anti-corruption measures that a state-level organization expects of a large international aid organization. And the work that we do can bypass that and really get to the crisis when it's happening and when people need help the most.
How exactly does the money get to the people? I mean, what are the methods and means that you guys are using now? There must be technology as it's coming forward and we're advancing and seeing new technologies. Are you guys utilizing any new technologies for that, or is it really just like checking accounts and...
Mostly it's partnerships with local organizations that have banking or bank accounts. And many of the places that we've worked don't have that.
That's what I was thinking.
And then it's a question of carrying cash. You may remember when the Rohingya were run out of Myanmar, when their villages were attacked, and many thousand Rohingya were brutally killed as they fled into Bangladesh. And when we went to help them, there was no legal way to move money to Bangladesh. There was no banking. It's not open banking.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why larger agencies take as long as they do to set up a system. So our team put cash in backpacks as carry-on luggage, and we carried cash, bought things locally, and we were able to help within 2 or 3 days of the crisis starting. And so that's a special situation.
It's another layer of danger that you're putting yourself into by even carrying cash, right?
Yeah, that was risky. Yeah. But again, what we feel driven by is the moral imperative that these people matter, that we're at some level connected to everyone in the world. And knowing what we know means that we can do something to help them. And what we've learned enables us to be more active in places that appear to be incredibly risky.
Yeah. Are there other organizations, people that you work with that have really, obviously, you guys can't do this all alone. There must be other organizations that have been great support systems for you as well.
There's many good organizations, and the ones we partner with most are local.
Okay.
Like right now, we're helping to deliver micronutrients and vitamins to children in the shelters in Ukraine, and that's done by a small, motivated group of entrepreneurs who, when the war started, agreed with each other that we can't stand by and let this happen and have our families fall apart because they're running from Putin's, war machine. And so they put together this distribution network that's amazing. They have large trucks that source to warehouses in places like Zaporozhye, where the nuclear power station is. Then they put those supplies in smaller vans, and they're even able to get into occupied areas and deliver food and essential provisions to families hiding in basements and subway stations and under attack. And so it's a huge privilege to work with people like that. They're organized, they're legal, they have a bank account set up, and we have a partnership with them. And I would say in all of the countries I've worked for the past 30 years, that's been the case, that we've partnered with local organizations in order to do the work that we do.
Now, is this work having to be done in secret, kind of under the, are we afraid of retribution from warring, factions if they knew who was helping?
Yeah, that is a risk that this one organization takes, and a risk that we take when we go there. I was just there.
Because you haven't said their name. I'm wondering if it was for a reason.
No. That particular organization has a kind of funny ring to it, but it's no problem to tell you. They're all over Facebook. It's called Patriotic Entrepreneurs of Ukraine.
Oh. Okay.
And so But there are others that we partner with
Yeah.
in the same space, and they take a tremendous amount of risk to do what they do. They risk their lives to help these families who are sheltering in their basements and wishing for the end of this horrible conflict. And word gets out somehow through the wire, through calls where these people are hiding, and this group is able to get to them.
So over the 28 years, or probably even longer now that you've been doing this, you must have probably tried everything and really honed in on what are the programs and the structures that really work. So what is it that you guys implement? I mean, what are the best program structures that you're using now?
Well, we've in our years helping refugees and internally displaced people, we've done everything from direct aid for fleeing families to rebuilding schools for children so they can get back into the classroom, to unaccompanied minor care or orphan care, sustainable community development. We've done all kinds of things. But my wife and I recently resigned from our organization in order to start Novi, focusing entirely on children surviving war. So while we may help their families because they're a part of a family, our focus is how do we help these kids with their basic needs? That's belonging and community cohesiveness. That's nutrition, education, and then addressing their reactivity to trauma or PTSD. Those are our 4 programs. So now we're very focused. We're a lot more narrow than we were a year ago. And that focus is entirely loaded on helping the youngest victims of war.
When we met and you were telling me the stories about how you and your wife founded the Partners in Relief organization early on, and you have 3 children. You've got 3 girls, and they really grew up during the time that you guys were doing this work, and oftentimes in tow with the work that you were doing. What is it like to take your wife and your children? I mean, it's hard enough to put yourself into harm's way, but knowing that you're bringing your family in such dangerous areas, what is that like?
My wife's a total badass. So she's fearless and she's strong.
Yeah.
So any of the work that I've done, she's matched. And including going into war zones with militia members and soldiers in order to be some kind of hope and help for those populations. You know, it's not always what we bring or what we have materially that is the biggest, most significant thing. It's that we show up and that we remind them that they're loved. They're not forgotten by the world. Okay. But raising my family, all 3 of my daughters were born in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And we lived there until 2009. So we lived there for about 20 years. And we decided early on, we have a couple of rules about travel so that if one of us gets hurt or otherwise, that the other one is still available for the girls. That's been a rule all along when it's a dangerous trip. But on trips that are less risky, as soon as our kids got all of their vaccines, we took them with us. So on those trips to the border of Myanmar especially, and to those 8 refugee camps where roughly 250,000 people live, my daughters were, every couple of months spending time with those children and those people in those camps. And for them, I know that was an enriching and formative experience for them. And if you meet them today, they're just spectacular human beings. So I feel that by bringing them with me, I haven't denied them a healthy childhood or the privileges that they might have had growing up somewhere else. I feel like my wife and I really enriched, what life is about and gave them something to walk out for the rest of their lives.
Oh, absolutely. How old are your girls now?
26, 24, and 21.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
In our series, we've done a lot of talk and research about biohacking and energetic medicine. And I believe it's the wave of the future. And energetic medicine happens to be very specifically effective with trauma and post-traumatic stress. And have you guys gotten an opportunity to work with any organizations specifically maybe on bringing energetic medicine to some of the kids?
No, we haven't. What we have done is what we've also learned together at our breathwork retreat last October, is the power of breath. And that is something that's integrated into the 3 therapies that our team psychologist is developing for Ukraine specifically, and then we'll take to the other countries that we work in. And it's also a part of our 4th tool, which is an activity kit. It includes breath work and how to upregulate from, a shutdown state, a freeze state, and how to downregulate from a fight or flight state. Yeah. These are all integrated into the work we do. But
so, for a lot of our listeners, they may not be familiar with breath work or how that works. Can you explain how you've seen the impact on the kids?
Well, with the children, in order to keep it something that isn't suspicious or weird to them and to their parents, it's activities like blowing bubbles that reminds them or that teaches them not to shallow breathe. So you have to take a deep breath in order to blow out a lot of bubbles. So that's one of the activities in this shelter kit. And then taking a cleansing breath is a part of what one of our psychologist mentors is training the play therapy part of our work to do. My wife also is a big fan of yoga. I also like yoga, but I'm incredibly inelegant and not good at it. But she's also integrating into those play therapy modalities yoga in the form of acting like an animal, like a cat or a dog or a bear or a squirrel or a monkey, and then playing music that is appropriate to that activity and getting the major muscle groups moving because that's hormone regulation and so forth. So that is a big part of what we're working on.
So most recently you've been working in Ukraine. What are some of the other areas that you guys have been able to have an impact in?
Projects like that education project and relief work and the ones that I've described earlier, we've done the same thing in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and surrounding countries during the conflict there or the breakdown there, and in Yemen. So in all of those countries, we've managed to successfully implement programs that had a direct impact on children and their families. And I guess the biggest project by far was, the biggest impact over years is the work we've done in the ethnic states in Burma, in Myanmar. But in Syria, during the Turkish invasion of Syria into Kurdish Syria, for about 70 days, we were feeding roughly 30,000 people a day.
Oh my God.
So that was a big project where we all felt that we were firing on all cylinders, so to say. We were doing this special thing that we could do, this contribution that we could make, and it felt really great.
Wow, so your donor money has a big impact in the world. 30,000 people a day.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. If you remember, those 30,000 people were the people who fled the cities that were attacked by Turkish armed forces with the support of ISIS and other extremist militias. So they fled to the city of Hasaka or other bigger cities in the southern part of Kurdish Syria, and were put up in public schools. And we stepped in right when the large agencies left because of the conflict and the escalation. We jumped in and carried the ball there for a few months.
Steve, listening to your stories, it just seems so like something you would read in books. It doesn't really sound like something that I would have a friend that does this type of work. Were you the kid in school that was always like volunteering for nonprofit stuff, or were you the studious kid, or were you the badass? What were you like as a kid? I
was a pothead.
So there's hope for us all, is what you're saying?
Yes, there is. I started growing marijuana when I was 12, and through all my high school years, I was a part of that culture. I was a drug dealer. My last name is Gumaer, but my nickname in my high school in Fairbanks, Alaska was Gummy Bear, because people could score drugs from me and buy pot from me. So no, I wasn't that idealistic kid, but I can say that really since I was as young as I can remember, I've had this ache inside of me, this ache that I feel, and I've always wondered what it was that I'm missing, always feeling that something's missing, and that there's some yawning abyss in my soul. That's how I felt this way since I was little. And when I was 12, I started reading books, spiritual books. In fact, Carlos Castaneda was the first series I read, and then G.I. Gurdjieff, another very spiritual writer. And reading those helped me identify that what I'm looking for is God. I can't figure him out. I don't know how to grab a hold of him, but that's what I'm looking for. So really, everything started changing for me in those years when I started exploring a spiritual path that culminated in 1986 when I thought, okay, I've got something. I'm getting connected to God now. And then this guy invited me to Thailand to live with him and his wife. So it wasn't intentional idealism on my part. It wasn't because of my, my wealth or my access to wealth. It was part of my spiritual search that had me in Thailand to begin with. And then going into this refugee camp in 1994, that was like, it was as though, looking at Rose and her explaining what that first little girl went through and seeing her, she's sleeping on the bamboo floor, calculating the cost, what it would cost to help her. It was $30 in the end, is all she needed to get on her feet and get through the first year. And when Rose explained that and looked up into our eyes and said, "Will you help?" I just thought, how could you say no to that? You can't say no. And for me, that was a big calling. It was a big outreach from God himself saying, this is for you. Say yes. So that's when things really got interesting.
Yeah. Well, we do a little thing here on Delphine Circle called Big Questions, and this is an opportunity for us to have a little better understanding of the man behind the mission. Do you have any consistent daily routines?
Almost every day I practice Tummo yoga, which is breath work. They're the Tibetan guys that melt the snow around them, and I haven't pulled that off yet, but I'm working on it. And I would say that the practice of Tummo has been a sustaining and nourishing practice that pulled me from the cliff many times. That breath work, that when you get to that place where the noise stops, there's magic there.
Is that part of a meditative practice as well?
Yeah. So following the breath, like one would follow a mantra, and concentrating on breathing in and concentrating on the exhale, which is a release, either through my mouth or through the tip of my nose, as Ram Dass instructs, and getting lost in the idea of in and out. I have other little practices that I do while I'm breathing, but at some point, whatever the practice is, if I do it long enough, usually takes 15 or 20 minutes, there is this reality changing snap. And I float and feel one with God. I feel connected to the world, to the world's people. And I feel nourished by some incredible, powerful energy. So that's an important practice for me. And especially when I'm down, I go to that. Yeah. I'll do it more often than once a day when I'm really provoked or anxious about things.
So if it helps you, it could help us with like traffic and, bills.
I promise it will help everyone.
Stuff. Yeah. Tell me something that people would be surprised to know about you.
I speak fluent Thai ผมพูดภาษาไทยได้แล้วอยู่ที่นู่น20กว่าปีทุกคน
Wow, you speak
รู้
it real good too, with a good accent.
But as fluent as I am, I make really, really great mistakes. When I first moved to Thailand, I thought I was really smart addressing my elders as P. P is how you address an elder in Thai language. It means elder. So every time I would get on the bus, if I was in a seat, to go to language school, if an elder got on the bus, I would stand up and I would say, P, nang tini, which means, elder, please sit in my seat. Mm-hmm. And many times they looked at me with like frustration, or they were angry, or they didn't sit down and they walked away from me on the bus. And I couldn't figure it out. So I asked my language teacher what I was saying. And instead of saying P, I was saying P. And because Thai has 5 tones and one word can mean 5 things, I was calling him a demonic spirit. So they were offended. So, okay, I speak fluent Thai, but with caveats.
Yeah, you can make some mistakes from now and then. Tell me about a piece of advice that you were given that's served you well.
Never eat with your left hand. Sounds kind of funny, but if you go to Asia, you're often eating with your fingers, especially in tribal cultures. But you'll notice that their hand will be down below the table, and they'll stir their food with their right hand, and then they'll put their food in their mouth with their right hand, never using their left hand, ever. And they'll never use their left hand to touch another person, or to touch a doorknob, or anything that could be then touched by another.
And why is that?
The left hand is used for less sacred duties.
Oh, okay.
Got that?
What happens if you're left-handed? You're out of luck.
Then you maybe are pretty hygienic.
Tell me, obviously there's so many, but what do you feel are the most pressing issue that we're facing in the world today?
Right before the fall of Mosul, when ISIS was fighting their last stand in Mosul in Iraq, I was in the Nineveh desert where ISIS had occupied villages, and there was an armored battalion blowing up those villages so that they could uproot ISIS and capture them or kill them. At the same time, there were families that were either held there or stayed because this was their home and didn't have another place to go. And those families either escaped into the desert, running for their lives, or just escaped to get away from the fight. And I have a very clear memory of one day we were helping families like that. And these are people on foot, 30, 40 people. This is moms, dads, grandpas, little kids, babies, everything. And they were carrying a stick with a white flag on it, walking in the middle of the desert. It's 1,000 degrees. And it was really sad. And we showed up with water and food, and as best as we could, we would help transport them. We would arrange rides for them to get to safer places. But many of those families, we just couldn't help. We couldn't transport them. So we would give them provisions to make it. And one such family, after we gave them what we could give them, they walked away, and I noticed a little girl that was 13 or 14, about the age of my youngest daughter at the time. And I realized the desert gets really cold. As hot as it is in the day, it's that cold at night. It's super cold. And I realized she didn't have a blanket, or, as far as I could tell, a jacket or any warm clothes. So I ran up the hill, and I took off. It was my very favorite jacket. This is the best jacket I've ever had. And I was aware of that when I ran up to her, but I ran up, took off my jacket and put it on her. And I'll never forget the face. She turned around and looked at me with this beautiful angel face and thanked me. And I felt, wow, it's the most pressing question of our day. It's 450 million children living in war zones. That's what we've got to fix. Mm-hmm. And I know it's complex and overwhelming because there is so much bad in the world, but that's not the time to say I'm therefore going to do nothing. We've got to do something. So for me, the white hot core issue is those 450 million children who are just trying to survive like that little girl, the nightmare of war. That's it.
Tell me something that you used to believe, but you don't anymore.
I used to believe that kids can't teach me anything. And I was in Ukraine doing an exercise, an emotional regulation exercise. And part of it includes artwork. And there was this beautiful little girl who was pretty shut down when she showed up. She was transported in a bus to this place where we were doing this activity. And she was with 40 other kids, but this little girl was shut down. And I watched her when she started doing art, and we talked about feelings. There's 4 basic feelings that we ask the children to identify. That's anger, fear, sadness, and happiness. Those are the 4 basic emotions that we have. And then we ask them to draw on their body where those things live, where they feel those feelings. And there's more to this exercise. But while she was coloring, I watched her get animated and start cracking jokes to her friends. She's probably 8 years old. And she's just stunningly beautiful little kid. And I watched her come alive. And it was the magic of art and focus on a task that was soothing and rhythmic. And I realized that's what I'm after. Mm-hmm. I'm after the presence of that little girl. That little girl taught me what presence looks like. Mm-hmm. I want that. It's like this little kid, that survived the destruction of her home and is for sure reactive to PTSD. I watched her drop it all in like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I thought, oh, wow, we can all get there. All of us can. The little kid taught me something.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure the breath work plays a role in that, right?
Oh, yeah.
The mindset shift.
Yeah, It is. It does, yeah.
Tell me about a goal that you've yet to reach.
Well, whether it's because of a lack of time or discipline or talent, I have not finished a book that I started 25 years ago.
What's that book going to be about?
It's not going to be published, that book. It's my 25-year ago idea of what's right and wrong and how to live within the right or wrong. It's very dualistic. You've probably run into that word in your spiritual practices. Good versus evil and no tension between the two. And it's just not where I'm at anymore. It's part of my historical record for my children, perhaps. But I've started a couple of other books, which hopefully time, discipline, and talent will help me finish.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question. I was going to ask you, over the 28 plus years that you've been doing this work, how have you seen yourself change? What lessons have you taken away from the experiences that you've lived through?
Oh, man. I mean, when we first met Rose, that widow in Myanmar refugee camp, and when we first said yes to that first little girl, we were 23 or 4. And I really thought I knew a few things. I thought I had things figured out. And in a way, I thought I could fix the refugee problem even. And working with that little girl started a chain reaction of realizing how little I really know about life and about the world, and made me a much more keen listener and humbled me. A lot of the assumptions I had made about life were unraveled by refugees, completely unraveled. A lot of my cultural assumptions about what is good and what is success, for example, was undone by refugees. So I'd like to say I'm a completely different person than I was when I started out in this adventure. And quite sure my wife would say the same thing.
It's interesting because you've been so many places in the world and you've worked with so many different cultures, different groups, and it seems that their needs are similar. And we are one, right? We're one people. And I think about how divided we've become just in America. I know your home country is Norway, and I don't know what it's like in Norway, but our country has become so, I don't recognize America anymore by how divided we've become. And I believe that if we all got to go and actually live and experience some of what you've experienced, it probably would be a unifying force, right? We start realizing, you know what, we are one. We have the same needs, the same wants, the same hopes for our children, for our family, for our lives. And I can see that you are such a beautiful person with such a beautiful spirit. So it's obviously
so well said, though. What you just described is, that's it, right there. One Burmese activist I know and respect well, she says, please exchange some of your freedom and wealth so that we can have access to it too. And she's fought for democracy for her whole life and laid her life down for it. And for me, that's a big inspiration that my access to wealth, my fortune in life, the place of my birth, the systems and structures that support my vision for what is possible, those are all things that I need to use to make this world a better place. And those 450 million children in war zones, those are my neighbors. Those are my people. They're not just a statistic on the news or a number. Those kids matter. They're the future of the world. So yeah, you put it so well. Thanks, Delphine.
Do you think, we hear so much on news, although I honestly try never to watch news. I read my news. But do you believe that what you're seeing in Ukraine is being accurately portrayed by our news sources here?
Roughly, yes. I do the same thing you do, so I don't know what all news agencies are saying, but I read the New York Times almost every day, for example, and they nail it. Okay. There are waves of information that come because the tolerance for this war ebbs and flows in the interest of the readers. So what editors choose to put out front or put in the paper itself depends on how they view that. But what does come out, so far I've been really impressed with the quality of the reporting and the veracity of it too.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. So where do you head off to next? I know you're here in California for a very short period of time. Where do you go to next?
I'll be in Colorado in a couple of days with one of my childhood friends. He's hosting an event to raise money to help these children. Then I'll get to go home and work on preparing our next big trip to Ukraine in January.
For people listening that you've moved, like me, that want to know how to make a difference, what do you recommend?
Well, something you articulated a couple of times now is that it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the bad news. And not only that, but the bad news seems impossibly complex the bigger it is. And solving one of those problems seems impossible. Something as seemingly simple as homelessness, for example, is a massively complex issue. So instead of thinking that you're going to solve the problem or fix the system, engaging with an individual or engaging with a group within the scope of your passion and the scope of your compassion, to me is the way to stay involved, engage, and if you engage with one group or one individual, like we did, we helped one little girl with, in the beginning it was only $30. When you do that, there's another little girl around the corner. And around that corner is a whole group of people that are marginalized. And what you find is eventually you become an expert in that space that you've dedicated to. So my advice would be to engage and not take all the bad and complex news as something to stop what is essentially beautiful inside of us and needs letting out. Love.
Thank you so much for being here, and more importantly, thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Delphine. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Delphine Circle. Don't forget to subscribe. It's free and it will help us keep these incredible interviews coming your way. Here are 2 other episodes you may enjoy. I'm Delphine. Welcome to my circle.